Everybody, welcome to another conversation series. And for those people watching on the stream, I'm Joe Ito, the director of the MIT Media Lab. It'll be an hour and a half, and anybody who's watching on the stream can tweet at the hashtag MLTalks, and you will, if you have questions and comments, we can pick them up during the talk. Today's speaker is Christine Sun Kim. She is a sound artist, a deaf sound artist, and she's going to first do a presentation and a demo, and then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And for the Media Lab folks, we're trying to figure out ways to collaborate with her. And today, after the talk from 4 to 5:30 in E14240, we'll have a brainstorming sort of get-together if you want to interact with her. And I will repeat this message again at the end. But without further ado, Christine.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Joey. I'm so happy to be here. So I was born deaf in both ears. And growing up, I just kind of took in what normal society's rules around sound. I used you as my speakers. I would see how you would behave and how you would react to sound, and that would help me to better understand sound. For example, sound itself has really a strong social currency in it in society today. It's very powerful, and that's why I consider it as currency. And it's very heavy, has a heaviness to it. But when I examine sound on a closer level, it really has that heaviness to me, especially in society. I feel as if I'm living in another country and just blindly following the cultural rules and norms of that country without really questioning or understanding why they're there. That's how I feel in my everyday life. You know, people tell me, oh, this is a socially acceptable or not socially acceptable sound, and I just accepted that. I never questioned it. I try to walk quietly. I don't slam a door. So I've learned what's appropriate, and I've manipulated or changed my behavior to fit your norms. I feel as if I really know sound so well, and I've internalized your definition of what that is and what your definition of silence is. And that sound is very political. I wish it wasn't, but I'll give you an example of this. I moved to Germany just recently. I went into a cellular phone store because I needed to get a SIM card for my telephone. So I went in to speak with the employee there, the worker, and I gestured to her that I needed to communicate by writing back and forth. And it was kind of awkward. Communication wasn't happening smoothly, and she didn't really seem to understand, and the tension was really rising, and I was getting quite frustrated. And she kept speaking to me, and as the communication failed, I instinctively know what I needed to do. I took a step back from the counter, and the top of my lungs screamed, just shouted out. And everybody looked at me. It's like everybody paused for a moment, and they looked at me, and then she realized, oh, you're deaf. Oh, I know what I need to do. And then all of a sudden, I just got the A+ customer service that I should have gotten in the beginning. So it's like, ironically, I had to use my voice that way to be heard. And that space of silence, that awkwardness, or just using gestures to communicate, there was no sound being emitted there, and that silence felt very heavy and it kind of took over the space. So I used sound to get rid of that awkwardness and that void, that silence. And a few years ago, I really found my voice as an artist through sound. In 2008, in the summer, I traveled around to different galleries and museums, different spaces that I went into. And at that time, sound as a medium was really starting to take off. It was being more recognized in the art world. And I would go into these spaces, and there was no visual art to take in. It was all sound being emitted that you needed to hear. And as I went from one space to the next, I thought, wow, as a visual artist, it feels very safe, yes. But then everything kind of got turned on its head, because now everything is about sound, and how do I develop this relationship with it? So every space that I went into, I would ask whoever was sitting there in the gallery working, communicating with them by writing, could you give me an idea of what this experience is about, the concept going on? And I was really moved by it. I enjoyed learning about the concept and the idea that they were trying to share with the public. And it seemed the idea really was more powerful and really trumped the idea of having to physically listen to the sound. Just having the idea and the concept was enough to be able to appreciate and enjoy the art. So then I went back home and I started thinking. I wanted to work with sound, but I wasn't sure how to do that. So I filled out some applications. You'd be amazed at the response I got. I got spaces, I got monetary support. And at first I was like, oh my goodness. So the first step that I took in working with sound was experimenting with low frequencies. So this was very basic, the sound being translated into something that you see visually. I had paintbrushes on a canvas that would make imprints, and was very tactile. That's what you see here on the left. My voice is the sound being created. The one on the right is made from a synthesizer and nails that had been dipped into ink. So it was a very simple process, but then I realized there's a huge universe, world of sound out there. Music, spoken language, all this history behind sound. And I was just focusing on this one itty-bitty little fragment of sound. I realized, wow, don't limit myself. It's not all about just vibration and feeling the sound, translating it that way. So sound as an idea. Sound can become experience, especially my experience, and that's what it is in my work. So my work for the past few years has changed dramatically and taken many different directions. So I'm going to briefly touch on some of the different things that I've done over the past few years and share them with you today. Can you turn the sound off? Thank you. So what you see here is, I'm going to give you several examples of my work, but I did a collaboration with Thomas Matter, who's actually currently my boyfriend. It's kind of like a love letter in a way. But I was in New York and he was in Berlin. And we came up with the idea of creating a recording as an act of communication. So we pressed the button on this recorder, packaged it up, sent it to the post office. As they put it on the van, and then on the airplane, and then as it arrives into New York, they put it on another truck, and then it arrives at my house, and then I hit the off button on the recorder. So that took 24 hours. So I'm like, okay, I have this sound file that was, all the sound from being packaged and flown across to the United States, yet Thomas could hear it and I couldn't. So that kind of screwed up my idea, and I was like, how can I kind of level the playing field here? So what we did, we signed a contract. It's a little bit hard to see, but up close, basically what it says is that Tom and I made an agreement. It's really strongly based on the honor system. And we laid out all these rules. If something were to go wrong and he was to hear that file somehow online, because this was part of an online project, if that was to be heard, then the whole thing could be scrapped and thrown out. And since this was signed in August of 2013, so far we haven't breached the contract. If that hadn't been successful, then you wouldn't be seeing this here. But trying to put us on a kind of on the same level and not the inequality of using my work to not disempower me, but to empower me and use it as a positive tool. So I understand that some of my work is not all, accessible to everyone, or maybe your definition of accessibility. But as long as the concept and the process is there, and I'm able to explain that, be it text or in person, that I'm satisfied with that. To me, it's considered accessible, as long as I'm responsible and having full control from the beginning to the end. So this is kind of an opposite idea of this recording contract. I reached out to 24 different people of various backgrounds, a director, a curator, writer, several different folks, and I asked them to record just 1 hour of their studio time. Maybe them contemplating any kind of busy work they may be doing, and record themselves for an hour. Maybe they're just reading a book, sending emails, in a meeting, maybe just walking around. So I got 24 hours of people's busy day, of them keeping busy. So I'm going to show you a brief kind of clip, a file from Pauline Oliveros. She's like a pioneer in experimental sound and music. So during her meeting at the Whitney Museum, where she was putting in an installation for the biennial they had there, I'll share a brief clip with you of that sound file. If you could start that. This brings me to not only sound, the concept or the idea of sound, but in a musical format. I'm kind of amazed with, taking something that kind of hijacking maybe a score or composition or an opera or a band, hijacking that and putting my voice or my idea on top of it. It kind of strengthens my voice and reaches out to a larger audience. I find that very interesting how that works. So this is playing around with the idea of my approach in thinking about sound. The general understanding for hearing individuals is that how they recognize kinds of themselves and their being is you actually hear it through your skull, through an audio loop, through the vocalizations that you make. I'm here. But how does a deaf person do that? They're not going to look at themselves in a mirror and see themselves signing. So one theorist by the name of Robert Savage, he shares the idea that I feel most fits this context, is how American Sign Language works is when you listen, say you're signing, there's a lot of grammar and syntax that happens on the face and facial expression. So you're looking into the eyes of somebody else who's listening or communicating in sign language. I can see that my facial expressions and kind of a visual loop feedback that I see reflected on their face and then back to me. So hearing individuals can kind of, be focused on themselves and doing other things and listening to that audio loop. Deaf individuals use that visual look, video feedback, so to speak, to get that. And that leads me to this. I often show this in my presentations. I love this video. It's one of my top 3 favorite projects in my life. Honestly, I can say that. These are all of my good friends from New York. They're all deaf. And I use the idea of an opera. How they use their voice to great extremities in an opera. And I think in American Sign Language, can be very descriptive as well. One friend told me they're in a metaphor of how American Sign Language works. So imagine this. Each one of your fingers on your hand, is a parameter of American Sign Language. Your pinky may be facial expression. Your ring finger may be speed or movement. All these different aspects that come with American Sign Language. In English, how you speak, it's very linear. Words come out, and it may be one key after another, so to speak. But in American Sign Language, it's more as if there's a chord being played. All 10 digits are being used at the same time because the grammar is happening simultaneously on the face as well as the hands. So not only that, most people think that American Sign Language is based so much on the hands, right? The manual aspect of it. But more than half the language is actually on the face and the facial expression and how the speed and control that you put there. So you'll see in this project, I asked several of my friends to quote unquote sing with me, but not with their hands, with their face. So it's as if they're half speaking. And now I'd like to share that video with you. Part of what you see there was the eye glance, the eye gaze that's part of sign language. This is a year when I first started experimenting with sound in my work. And I got a space, I got a tutor to teach me how to order the right equipment and what to use. So I was alone in my space, and I was very excited to play around with feedback and the sound that you would get when the mic gets too close to the speaker. And I just, as you can see, put my face right into it. And I did this for hours and hours and hours and hours, and I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling so good. I started feeling a little dizzy, and I thought, oh, did I just see someone out of the corner of my eye? No, I didn't see him. So I'm like, I gotta go home. So I took off, and I really didn't sleep well, and I didn't go back to that space for about a week. And then I realized, oh, for you folks, hearing individuals who can hear, when you go into a space and the sound hurts your ears, it's a warning system. You leave. But I don't have that. There's no threshold for me for pain, and there's no warning system, so I just delved right in. And I realized psychologically and physically it really impacted me. So it's like kind of like a sonic response physically that I had. So not only was I hearing, through my ears, but through all parts of my body. So I created a story, a drawing of that experience. I call it Feedback Aftermath. And you see the score there? And what you see on the far right are the kind of delayed response that I had of the different dimensions of sound that you take in, not just through your ears, but through your body. And you notice there's no notation, because I felt like the lines themselves, the smears and the smudges, there was a lot of things already happening there. It was very noisy. So it already seemed, like I said, noisy to me. This is another drawing, and I realized in music, this musical system, wow, it's pretty dense. It's has a long history, the musical notation, the scores. And then I did some reading about American Sign Language. They kind of have a rough system for what they call glossing in American Sign Language, a way to notate sign on paper. And I noticed these two different notation systems, American Sign Language and music, really the history behind them you really can't compare, but they have a lot of differences, yet at the same time, there's a lot of similarities. In American Sign Language, the context, the contextualization of sign language, how you can you can't fully capture one concept in American Sign Language and notate it on paper. Similarly with music, depends on who the musician is and how they interpret the music. So I thought, let's bring these two systems together and integrate them. So I did that, and that's what I got. FACE. This was an attempt to help me learn the different notes on the scale. So to me, the piece that I just showed, kind of the face opera, this is similar to me, FACE. And ironically, it's funny too, because all sounds sound the same to me, right? So then I played around with different drawings on this theme. And this have to do with different gestures. Here in the United States, if you make this gesture, like, hold on, wait a minute, right? That index finger of the number 1. And then moving on to the number 2, growing up and going to McDonald's, I often ordered the number 2 value meal. Is that the Big Mac? Am I right about that? Yeah? Anyways, I always ordered number 2. And now when you go to the third one, in American Sign Language, this is how you sign 3. But sometimes people will do it this way, which is actually the number 6 in sign language. And lastly, the sign for score, the 4 hand shape. Really, a score has, the staff has 5 lines to it. But in American Sign Language, that's not a natural gesture to create, so instead we use the 4 hand shape. This is to do with the concept of, in American Sign Language, of signing past. How it works is where I am right now is representative of time. In front of me is the future, behind me is the past, and where I am closely toward my body is the present. So with one hand, you can see the notation, the 1H signifies one hand. So if you go like this, a long time ago. The second one is in the past. And then we have what used to be. And this is kind of a very romantic sign. Once upon a time, with 2 hands, open palm. As you can see the markings there on the sheet. Pretty self-explanatory. Not exactly your score. One too many voices. This has to do with the idea of growing up and worked with so many different interpreters, and all the traveling I've done and collaborating with interpreters and others, especially here in the States and as well as in other countries. Sometimes they'll fly interpreters in. So it's almost like window shopping for clothes. Does this, I think, I'm in the mood for this voice today. No, I think I'm in the mood for that interpreter and that voice today. You know, depending on how I want to context myself and the voice I'd like to address. So I have, as you can see, one too many voices. This is another story that I speak about often in the presentations that I give. This musical notation of the P, meaning piano. So if you were playing music, you need to quiet down when you see that notation. If you're playing an instrument, you see two P's, you need to be even quieter. The more P's that you see, the quieter you need to be as you're playing the music. So as many P's as you can put out there, it's never completely silent, even though it's very pianissimo. And thus, all these P's, that's my current definition of silence. Growing up, I've kind of internalized your definition of silence, but for me, this is my closest definition of silence to me. So this is another project. Speaking about the musical format, we're moving on to another project that I did. I'm a big-time collaboration horse, so I work with so many different people, technicians, interpreters. And so for this project, it seems that I started my practice took a little bit of a turn. So collaborating is kind of my way of feeding value into my voice. And by, latching on to maybe a musician who has a large voice in society, maybe has a lot of, social value to it, if I borrow their voice, all of a sudden I have a voice. So their voice given to me into my work makes my work valid. So I've latched on and collaborated with many different individuals. I feel it's a good way for me to exercise, my space in society, and to kind of continue to be relevant, whether I have an interpreter, and if I didn't have interpreters or other individuals to collaborate with, I feel that I would just kind of fade off into oblivion. So this is entitled 4x4. It was in Stockholm, Sweden, just this past January. And I decided to write my first song. Oh, I was so excited to do that. I sucked at it, but anyway, I decided to write a song, and I asked Tony Conrad, Martina Roberts, and those two are, sound, experimental video music individuals. I also worked with my good friend Jeffrey Mansfield and Bob Cohn, who commercialized voicemail. My last gentleman, Jeffrey Mansfield, is a friend of mine and a designer. So I asked the four of them, I gave them my song, and this was my voice, right, because it was my song, but they were going to speak it or sing it and give it back to me, and then I gave it to a technician who dropped it down to 35 hertz or below, down to 10 to 35 hertz in that range. And the reason I made this decision is because at 20 hertz, sound, you can't perceive sound anymore. Your brain doesn't process it. You don't recognize it, because the tone or the pitch. You might be able to feel it, but your ears can't, or brain necessarily can't process it once it drops below that range. So the lower it gets, the less air is actually being transmitted. You'll see maybe a wall vibrate or a ceiling or the floor. You'll see that in the architecture. So I was fascinated with the idea of going into a space and experiencing something that you think you hear a song, but do you actually? How are you listening to it? And by the end, you're hearing it, but you're hearing it through the space, how the space is responding to the sound that's being put into the space. So it's the results of my song. It's not necessarily... Is this clear, what I'm saying to you all? I hope I'm being clear on my explanation. I'll show you a short video of what it's all about. Most of it's really, you can't discern it. It's very obscure. You'll see people chatting, and it's hard to capture that on camera. And what you hear is through, people's interaction and, the architecture responding. A similar concept or idea of like hearing the wind. You may hear the leaves rustle in the wind. You saw the window vibrating there, and that was kind of a result of hearing the results of the wind or the sound. That's what I did with that space, and why you saw all the different architecture. It was results of my song being played at such a low level hertz that you could see how the architecture in the space responded to that. So this is another, not only do I collaborate with individuals, I also use technology a lot in my work. I've made use of that in my artwork, and I feel like the use of technology can help me to communicate better with individuals who do not know sign language by Big Words app or via text. And it helps me to better understand sound better. I can get a closer look and a clearer understanding of what it's all about. I think that sound itself is a big-time privilege. It's amazing, as well as it's American Sign Language. It's a big privilege to be a part of that world. And American Sign Language has a lot of similarities with music. I want to kind of mention that I know, this can be very controversial, the deaf community and the deaf culture, and I don't want people to look at us as a disability, but more as a linguistic minority. And just because our language is not vocalized, is not a spoken language, it's completely visual language, it kind of makes our stand in society weaker. It's like there's no clear space for us out there in the world. And it's very oppressive in regards to our cultural identity. So I was considering this, and I was trying to think of another example. Comparison that I could give. So there's several thousand languages spoken in the world today, spoken and written, and more of them, the dominant languages are taking over. And those smaller languages are starting to disappear and become extinct. In the same way, I can see that happening with American Sign Language. Well, let me go back a little bit. American Sign Language in the media, people are like, oh, it's so romanticized. Isn't it great? It's such a novelty. It's amazing, right? You get a lot of attention. But on the other side, when it comes to education system, medical system, politics, it's a very sticky world out there. Oh, it's okay to teach baby sign language, but it's not okay to teach deaf children sign language? And American Sign Language is out there, but they're going through this struggle. Are they growing? Are they fading away? And it's in danger of fading away because of not because of other larger languages, dominant languages, but because of technology. And that's, I guess, the best example that I could give as a linguistic minority about what's happening to our community and our culture today. I feel that technology has helped my life in an amazing way. It's made a lot of things easier. I get accessibility, I can take in more information. But at the same time, I feel that it's kind of a one-way street. I'm always having to make the accommodation to them. Where is it a two-way street, where we're working together? I feel it becomes an issue because technology itself is looked at, oh, it's so helpful. It can help you resolve issues and do this and do that. But really, actually, I feel that it becomes, in a way, marginalizing us. You know, we're a small group, a minority language, and what the dominant culture speaks and does out there is usually what goes. So I guess I just want to say that I'm a little bit worried about our deaf community. I don't know how to show it, but I'm struggling with envisioning a clear argument that helps to show and convince you, who are not part of the deaf community, to look at us and convince you to understand that it's important for you to give us support to our language and our culture. How that's going to happen, I don't know. I feel as if I want individuals to see things from our perspective, value our culture, not something to be, try to fix or make do or oppress. And how can I help you understand that we're healthy, a good, healthy addition to society today? I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I feel like I don't necessarily have a strong enough argument yet. Is diversity important? Yes. So in connection to that, how can we use technology in a healthy, contributing way to bring different people of different backgrounds, of different languages together to collaborate without losing your identity, your values, and your norms and your culture? Can technology and American Sign Language coexist? I don't know. That's my presentation for today. So thinking back, I've also been working on a new project. It's entitled Game of Skill. I've been working with Levi Lorenzo. He's an electronic instrument designer. The two of us have been working together and collaborating on this project, and it's about listening. And I like the idea of using the idea of hearing and how difficult it is. This is coming from my perspective, understand, and what I've gone through. So it's based on, well, they're going to set it up for us now. I have a little text from BuzzFeed. It's entitled, If White Characters Were Described Like People of Color in Literature. I asked a friend of mine to read this text, and that's what's the file on this device. Thank you, Levi. So that sound file has been put into this device. And the idea is to walk along this line. Oh. The sound will emanate from the speaker on this device. And only if you walk perfectly will you actually be able to clearly understand the sound file. If you walk too slow, or if you walk forward or backwards, the sound that comes out is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to invite Joey Ito to come out and be our guinea pig today to demo this new game of skill.
Her dream. Radiant and her skin glowed with rats. Characters were described with color.
You can go a little faster. You can even try walking backwards. See what happens. That's why it's a game, right? You got to work at it. It takes a while to really get down that skill of walking at the right speed. And it's made analog design on purpose. But thank you so much, Joey.
Thank you.
Deaf applause, hands up.
Okay, so we're good.
That's it. Okay, so now we're going to start the conversation.
think we're going to bring the chairs up, but Christine's been trying to teach me American Sign Language, and we did a Skype session, and this felt like what it feels like when you realize how much you suck at speaking.
Ah,
No, but
you learn pretty fast.
what was, I think, interesting, because when she mentioned in her talk a little bit about how she started thinking about music and the similarities between sign language and music, it was, I think, when I met Christine at TED, and I realized how expressive her sign language is. I think Christine's probably more expressive than some people, but still, I think that her whole point about the bandwidth of sort of parallel communication that's going on, I think in many ways it might be true that it's you're getting more information than you would get from a sound file. And there was this interesting conversation I was having with somebody who had recently had throat cancer, and they were talking about an electrolarynx. So could you sing again? And how would you control it? And actually, we were talking with Joe Paradiso about these devices, but then I thought that if we could figure out how to parse sign language, then you might actually get enough dynamic range to control your voice in a way that you would sing. And so I think that the sort of sophistication and the breadth of sign language was first what got me particularly interested, and then. Temple Grandin, who is a speaker here recently, she talks a lot about autism, and her definition of autism is somebody who is weak at one thing but extremely strong at another thing. And one of my favorite quotes of hers is that if it weren't for autistic people, we would still be living in caves. And she says that Mozart and Tesla and Einstein would all be considered autistic today. And we have a group right over there that works on affective computing, trying to understand people's facial expressions. But I think that Christine obviously has heightened ability to read and write affect. And I think that sort of understanding what it's like to have somebody who is extremely talented at face is both from a technical perspective but also just sort of a societal perspective really interesting. And so that was one of the areas I was sort of interested in trying to understand.
Yeah, that affective computing, I was trying to, base the idea of maybe videotaping myself and transferring that into kind of a linear spoken language text to sound, or the other way around, facial expression to hearing. And I'm really still not convinced because, the study of emotions is quite hard. Same thing could be with sign language. Like this is a sign for happy in general. So if you were to videotape somebody and capture that sign happy, but what if you do it this way? Look at my face. It means I'm not really that happy. Yes, really, I'm really, really happy. Oh, I'm fucking high, right? Oh, I'm so happy. But it's all the same sign, but the way it's manipulated on the face can kind of be convincing. It's like almost you can kind of trick the computer. So that's kind of like, yeah.
I mean, do you find certain cultures are better at face? Because I see Marco
really,
there.
everyone has that skill. They just don't use it. Maybe it's more natural for us because we use sign language, as youngsters. It's just part of our life. But there are other deaf people that are even better at it than me. There's plenty of them out there. I'm really not that great. But there's different levels, So I don't know. I really think everyone has that ability and has that skill.
Although we have, for instance, I have a friend with Asperger's who has to remember to smile, and I think that for some people it's actually a lot more work, and they may have sort of the inverse disability, It's and then there's a famous Finnish poster of men from Finland, and it's a matrix of all of them have the same face like this, and it says passionate, angry, love, and it's all the same face. And so I think some cultures have
very flat
stereotype
affect.
of having,
Yes.
not so much face.
Yes.
But what's interesting also, I was talking to one of my musicians friends, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and he's working on very high bitrate music now, the sort of high definition music. And it turns out that digital music equipment now, so computers and CDs, most of them can't handle the increase in the quality. And so he's throwing it all out and reverting to mostly analog musical equipment. And I think what's kind of interesting, my parallel also, is that when you have sort of full motion signing and facing, you probably have a much higher bit rate than you do in like ASCII and other things. And I think it's interesting to think about it from a technical perspective of where sort of analog and biological still, I mean, and we think about this a lot in machine learning and AI and things like that, but it'd be interesting to see if there was a way to measure how much information is actually going between two people when they're signing compared to people on like
The machine
text.
would probably break down.
Huh?
The machine would probably break down. Couldn't handle it. I'm just joking.
But you were talking about sort of the deaf culture, deaf community as sort of a linguistic. You called it a linguistic community or minority.
Linguistic minority.
And as a minority, is there a culture that it's very different? Like I think minority has its own sort of subculture. Would you call it a subculture that has its own sort of rules and?
Well, subculture, I'm not maybe the best person a representative of the deaf community to make this explanation, but deaf culture is based on the language and our behavior and social norms, how we think. We have, maybe I can ask the interpreter to answer that question. I'm not exactly sure how to explain that. Dylan, do you think you have an answer?
Put me on the spot.
Right, we are putting you on the spot. Deaf culture is based on language, behavior.
I don't think they're based on each other, but they're intrinsically tied to each other. One wouldn't exist without the other, but chicken or the egg, they're together.
So they're together, but they're not. They're.
But what exactly would you say is deaf culture?
You're the deaf.
That's your question, right? Joey, is that your question? What is deaf culture? Would you-
Yeah. So I guess, and you have it, Mike. You're now a participant.
I'm embarrassed.
No, because I'm curious because I think subcultures and cultures have communities, and you sent me some links of videos, and for instance, I saw that the videos that deaf people were doing for other deaf people, you were showing had much better expressions on the faces and things like that than to the interface to the outside. And I'm curious sort of how organized the community is, and what you were sort of questioning technology, and I was curious how much technology is used by the community.
When I mentioned about the technology part, I was trying to be not too political in it. Being vocal, what I meant by that is in regards to, protecting our language and protecting our position in society. How there's a struggle going on. We speak out and kind of, we want to be heard to protect ourselves and our language. That's what I meant by saying that we're very vocal. Technology, is just taking off, and deaf people are looked at it kind of like from a medical perspective. Oh, you need a cochlear implant. You need hearing aids. That kind of thing is what I'm trying to shy away from. I don't have an answer for that, and I'm not for or against. Everyone makes their own personal choice. So in regards to being vocal, that's the part where, we're very loud and we want to be heard and we want to be recognized. And the media kind of like, the way they just marginalize and, everybody can tweet and everybody can post and I read all these things, but where is all of this happening, recognition in the media? Because we're just, a language that's not an oral or spoken language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because getting back to the bandwidth issue, I have a friend who was, he studied the Japanese during the war, and the Japanese only used phonetic alphabets for telegraphs during the war. They didn't use the Chinese characters. So he said, well, if you can run a war without Chinese characters, that means you can communicate without Chinese characters. So why don't you simplify the world for everybody and get rid of them? And I think the Japanese were appalled because there's a tremendous amount of nuance that gets transmitted in the pictograms. But of course, you can do the minimum viable communication with the text. And I think what was interesting to me as I started to get to know Christine and sort of understand more and more about signing was that there was a lot of information there that you couldn't reduce into text, but it wasn't easily understood or expressed. And I think what I'm curious about is how do you get, because I was lucky, I got to sort of hang out and spend a couple of hours, and I got a big aha that there was this whole other way of communication. But like how, because I think for subcultures, some people it's through food, some people it's through music, but there's usually some way that other cultures sort of connect to you. And to me, sign language is such a rich and interesting cultural asset that the deaf community has, that somehow if we could build that into, maybe it's the way you like, for instance, if you use sign language to talk to your computer or to communicate or to control musical devices, I mean, maybe non-deaf people, like I'm a scuba instructor, and we use basic sign language underwater. And now that I'm starting to learn sign language, I feel like all the instructors should use it. But it would be interesting to think about whether sign language is something that could be promoted across outside of your community. Or has it already?
Yeah, and if you use that with technology, that kind of technology where you can get feedback, it's not just a one-way street, so to speak. Like, you'll get that feedback, that reaction to my sign language and interaction. American Sign Language is very, what do I call it? How do you say it? It doesn't just happen on stage. Because if I'm standing on stage and the light's in my eyes, I really can't see the reaction of the audience. But when I do see that head nod or the shaking or the quizzical look, that gives me a lot of feedback and kind of helps me to regulate my presentation. And that's a big part of signing and communicating in ASL.
I hope you don't mind if I mention something that you said on a blog, because we were at TED. And there was a presentation by this guy named David Eagleman that some of you might have seen. It was this jacket that took sound and converted into some tactile feedback in the back. And the claim was that he could teach people to recognize words by the tactile feedback in the back. And everybody at TED was like, Christine, you should try it. And then she sort of made this offhanded comment, yes, yet another technology for you to talk to me, And it was this very interesting thing that you don't really realize until you sort of put yourself in Christine's position. And I realized, no, actually, creating tools for us to augment us to be better at sign language is probably more interesting than some sort of tactile one-way thing.
Right, because we're always having to make the adjustment, right? We're always going to have to make, why can't somebody meet us halfway? Or each of us take a step forward to meet each other in the middle?
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, for me at the Media Lab, a lot of the work that we do in the Center for Extreme Bionics, for instance, the first phase is trying to eliminate disabilities, but then the second phase is to take those technologies to augment people to make them better, and I think that, again, I'm biased because I think about my scuba diving, but if I could sign as well as she does to my students underwater, we would be much better scuba divers. And I think that what's interesting is to be able to take skills.
It'd be like slow-mo, signing in
like,
slow motion.
Hey.
Oh, there's a shark over there.
It's too slow, yeah. But
Sorry, go ahead, continue.
No. But so I mean, I would love to try to come up with some sort of project at the lab where we can take some of the and learn from you some of the things that you've learned on how to communicate, because again, I think affective computing that we have is a lot about getting people up to sort of a baseline. But what can you do on top of that that's creative? I think that's something that would be very interesting to work on.
Mm-hmm. I think we need to start with some form of a system. Disability, language, the system itself, society, I think that's where we need to start first. Maybe technology can work to change that. I don't know, just the way people perceive. But I really do look forward to working here and working with the lab.
I think it's interesting when you look at the athletics for prostheses that biomechatronics is working on. I mean, people with prostheses can now run faster than human beings, normal human beings. And it looks like the Paralympics in
Right.
Tokyo will probably be more interesting than the normal Olympics because of the augmentation and sort of the things that you can do. And I think there's a general trend that sort of the idea that a disability is actually a way to focus on other things, and then it gives you sort of these superpowers. And I think that's in addition to diversity just generally being good. I think that's a lot of what the work here at the lab is about. But we haven't. But what's interesting to me is sort of we often use the word underrepresented minorities as a group of people that we need to increase. But what I found out recently is that there is a class called unrepresented minorities. So we don't have any Native Americans here. We don't have deaf people here. And so I think one of the hardest things is underrepresented minorities are kind of easier to identify because they're actually at the table. And the unrepresented minorities are the ones that you actually don't have a natural ability to communicate, and they're harder to find. And I think that that's another, it would be interesting to think about this sort of as an institutional thing. For instance, is it better to embed a deaf person or a group inside of the lab? Is it better to create a deaf group and put non-deaf people and embed them there? I've heard of people who have gone to a deaf school for a while and just how amazingly interesting it is to be immersed in deaf culture as somebody who doesn't speak. But those kinds of experiments are also things that I think I'd be very interested in working on. So maybe you should bring a whole team next time that you come.
Yes. All right, bring it on, party here. And when you talked about the Paralympics, one thing that I'm fascinated with is how, glasses, they're one of the only few things that I can think of that are, it's like a fashion accessory to wear glasses. It's really to correct your vision so that you can see the world. But you put on glasses, and somewhere along the line it became fashionable. Like, oh, I'm going to put on glasses to look fashionable, look cool. Maybe you don't even have lenses. They could be just a frame. But why are these corrective lenses acceptable as a fashion accessory and other things are not? Like prostheses or hearing aids or other things like that. So that idea of using corrective lenses or glasses, which has become acceptable and fashionable, maybe the other things can follow suit. I know I talk facts, so thanks the interpreter for, catching up.
But I think you can make sign language pretty fashionable. I mean, just to be able to talk to other Media Lab people and not let anybody else know very easily what you're talking about, I think that'd be pretty cool. I'm going to start.
Yeah.
So you guys better learn it. And we have some questions from the audience.
All of you,
as
I'm
well.
watching you. You better start learning.
I know, there'll be a test. Yeah, the next time she talks, we'll just do it in sign language. So if you...
You're going to have to be part of the audience.
I know. Okay, Xiao. How do we train ourselves to tune into what our body is saying? Or Xiao, are you here? Or is she watching online? Can't ask her to clarify because she's not here.
Are you speaking in general, or can I read this, what was written? I guess I listen better. I listen better with my body, I guess. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to read some other ones. This is funny. This is from Moran Cerf, who's the neuroscientist that was speaking here that you should talk to at some point. Were you inspired in your choice of career by science fiction? Or actually, this is about...
Maybe in a very basic level it did influence me. I'm sure maybe, science fiction is full of imagination and curiosity, experimentation. So a lot of my work, I try to work with different people. Even if I fail, I think I fail. A lot of my projects failed hard, but I'm fine with that. In the back of my mind, I kind of look at science fiction as full of imagination, and I envision whether it works or doesn't work, that's fine. So maybe in a small way, yeah, it has.
Do you think that I'll generalize this question, but do you think that support for business development and other support for deaf people is getting better or not?
Support from who?
Support, I don't know, I guess from governments or from...
Can I read the question? Oh, I'm not really a business person. I know of other people who are involved in that field, but one thing I do notice here in the States is that, and also in the UK, because there's a lot of kind of self-made individuals that they know how to invest, and maybe they have family money or they have friends who give sponsors or wherever that may come from. In general, I think a lot of this support, maybe not so much in the deaf community because it's so small in regards to business, but I'm sure, I really can't answer that.
Interesting. Also, if there's anybody here that...
A lot of questions
We have
on
a
Twitter that I don't know the
microphone as
answers
well.
to.
There's one back there in the corner, Jen.
I really enjoyed your talk. In working with technology, often we are required to translate physical or experience into discrete information. We have to sample from it or reinterpret it in a non-ambiguous format so that we can use a computer to make sense of it. And I'm wondering, with the way you sign or with American Sign Language, what role ambiguity plays in the act of signing, and if that's a tool you use to express yourself or to communicate, and what effect you think that technology might have on the need to remove some of that ambiguity.
You know, to express ideas in general with society, or in thinking with myself?
When I watch you sign and you're making facial expressions, there's a lot of initial reactions I have to it, and I'm not sure if a person who understands sign language is what degree they're interpreting based on the potential ambiguity in a facial expression you make, or if that's part of the conversation is them responding to, I guess, the potential for ambiguity in your expressions.
Well, we did rehearse and went over my talk in advance, so the interpreters had an idea of what I was going to say. I shared with them the tone that I wanted to put out there and how I wanted some specific things worded. And so the interpreters were aware before they had a good idea going into this. But the ambiguity part, it really depends on the individual. It depends on the personal interpreter. It depends on how smooth they are with that scale of translating from American Sign Language to English. The interpreters, using an interpreter requires a lot of trust. And Denise, that you see sitting here, Denise Kaler in the audience in the front, we've been working together for many years. So I trust her enough to, let her make the interpretation, and to, if the ambiguity is there or not, she makes that decision, and I trust her to make those.
So just maybe a quick follow-up. What do you think it would take for you to trust a piece of technology that was maybe communicating to somebody else that you were using to communicate with, to someone who doesn't understand sign language?
Depends on what the technology is. Like, for example, the color of my emotions using technology. If somebody has already assigned a value system that red means anger, blue means sad, they've set up these rules, and they have the rules set up in the standard or the settings. There's a range. So I feel like if that kind of standards are set, then I could trust it, because that's kind of already been preset and from other people's perspective. I think several technologies for deaf individuals, they're very important to incorporate in the process of design and development for any device. I'm tired of seeing things come our way that are coming from the hearing perspective. I'm like, this isn't for me. keep on going, try something else. So I really would like to see any technology that is developed to really keep deaf individuals in mind when it's being, through that process of development.
Yep.
And hopefully that
There's an
answered your
app-
question.
There was an app we were using yesterday that translated
Yes,
between
yes,
languages,
yes.
sign language. And I remember hello in Japanese was something weird, right? It was, do you remember hello in Japanese? It was something like, it was just like very complicated. And then in like Russian, it's, and then in America, it's.
In America, it's the same way. Just, hey, raise your hand, hello.
A lot of it, there's this sort of, I guess there's this notion of there's a word for it, and different languages have different words that affect the way you think. And it would be interesting to see how much sign language itself changes how you think, and then how different dialects and different languages of sign language, because definitely when we were looking through the Japanese, the sign language is way more complicated than American Sign Language, and it was kind of interesting and strange.
I think, another thing that I notice, and as I've traveled, I'm not going to say it's the same everywhere, but it seems that in most countries they have sign language that still, some of them are formally developed languages, and they seem strongly based on the spoken language of the country. But here in America, American Sign Language is quite different. The roots of American Sign Language actually come from France, and the syntax. Individuals may have created what they call home sign, and all these things together have come to be what we call American Sign Language today, where the syntax and the grammar is not based at all on spoken English. So we are more, different than similar in that way than I see in other countries. Some languages are really very, very dependent on the spoken language, the dominant spoken language of the country that they're in. So American Sign Language is able to stand on its own, and I see that as distinct and separate.
It's really interesting. Did you see?
Yeah, so I want to share a reflection. So actually, when I was a kid, I used to talk to my sister in the very late night when my mom really wanted me to go to sleep. And I just gestured to her, but she couldn't understand what I want to say. So I started to whisper to her. Then my mom will notice. Actually, at the moment when I saw you talking to your interpreter before the presentation, before your talk, I realized that is actually superpower. You are gesturing when you are a little bit far away. You don't need to shout. You just elegantly communicate what you want to do. I think I was very, very impressed, and I agree with Joey in a sense that is a superpower, you are better leveraging that than us for sure. And another just a small question. While I'm listening to your talk, I actually also start to know you through your interpreter's voice. I actually think partially your personality is defined both by yourself and also your interpreter. We talk about using, for example, virtual glasses, computer to augment a person. But at this situation now, I feel like you are augmenting yourself also through your interpreter. I just wonder how do you like or how do you comment on this idea or notion that I'm having now?
Well, with an interpreter, we meaning the two of us kind of become one whole voice, right? And I'm okay with that. That's how the world works. I kind of play that game where wherever I go, who do I want for my interpreter? Who do I want to sound smart? I'm going to pick Denise. I'm going to go to another one where I want to be funny. I'm going to choose a different interpreter, depending on the, Dylan, he's pointing to Dylan. Okay, yeah. So depending on the scenario and what I want the audience to hear about my personality, if I want to be funny, I'll choose this interpreter. Like I said before, it's like window shopping. What clothes am I in the mood for today? What interpreter am I in the mood for today? And that also brings me back to the beginning, your comment talking about, you and your sister and wanting to talk at night. Many people envision, deaf people as very quiet, but no, I'm pretty loud. so loud that my upstairs neighbor got really angry, came downstairs and left a note and said, "You're too noisy, I can't sleep. You're walking around, slamming the door." So in general, people think deaf people are quiet, but often we're not. And vocally, we may vocalize sometimes. We're not mute, our vocal cords work, and we can clap or make noises, and so it's funny, we're actually quite a loud group as deaf individuals.
Yeah, just very quickly respond to your second point. I think that's super cool to choose your personality based on the situation. We have a movie player, a movie character I like a lot back in China. He always played this really funny role, but he actually have a lifelong partner who play all the voice out for him on stage. When I see him in real life, he behaves so differently, not funny at all. So I think that's super cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So there's a question from Yosha Bach, and he says, music creates addictive pleasures based on stimuli and structure, not just content. And then there's just, I'll add another thing to this, which is it's shown that music will trigger the reward center of your brain that gets same for food and sex and things like that. Is there something similar in sign language that gives you kind of an addictive or a euphoric feeling?
I'm not very part of that.
Wait.
Like ASL, it brings to mind ASL poetry. Sometimes, it can be based on a specific rhythm. Maybe I'm sitting there, watching it, and it can express different feelings and emotions, and all the different parts and aspects of American poetry and American Sign Language can kind of have that idea. It reminds me of another issue it brings up, that's something I think about, is ASL in the media. It's out there in the world, and it's becoming more and more popular. People are encouraged, everyone, to learn sign language, deaf or hearing. But sometimes it's kind of like, it's like they're hijacking or taking advantage of our culture, and that doesn't necessarily sit well with me. ASL music, deaf or hearing, people signing music in ASL, it's not natural. There's something wrong with that picture that doesn't sit well with me, and I kind of want to push back and say, the deaf community is more, more music. I'd like to see more music videos. Does it have to be, like, what is the definition of a song? Does it have to be something that's sung with your voice, with words? Or this is something that I've been thinking about for a while, just to put it out there.
You've seen
ASL music, interpreting music into ASL just really isn't natural to me.
And you've seen the finger terping, right?
Finger what?
Finger terping. I think it's called terping. Is that what it's called? The thing. It's kind of like the Samsung ad, where
This, like this?
No, I can't. Does anybody here know what it's called? You know what I'm talking?
Yeah. I think
it's terping.
I don't know.
Anyway, but there is definitely a sort of a finger art, sort of it's still linked to music, but it's a little bit different.
Do you guys, anyone else in the audience familiar with that? Know what it's called? I've seen the video on it, but I don't know exactly what it is. No.
It's kind of like breakdancing with your hands, Yeah. And then I know you dance.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. I love to dance.
Gershon, you had a question that I don't really understand. Do you want to explain it? We have a mic. Oh, you have a question.
I just looked it up online. It's finger tutting.
What? Oh, finger tutting.
Finger tut.
Finger tutting, that's right. Look it up later.
Finger tutting. Okay. I'll have to remember that.
Yeah, so I had a question kind of in relation to to what the issues Joey was talking about kind of assistive technologies and prosthetics and superhuman and all this stuff. And so we have this group that makes prosthetics here, and the person who leads the group kind of wants, the prosthetics are designed for him to use, and so it's one of the few examples where someone who wants an assistive technology is actually deeply embedded in the design of technology, which is rare. But there are a lot of other examples at the lab where something like deafness or autism is kind of the introductory paragraph, the motivation for some kind of work, but there isn't really a deaf person or a person with any form of disability involved in the design. And so what I posted, I was just kind of interested. There are different ways to describe these technologies. Like, are they corrective or assistive, or do they translate? Are they for me? Are they for you? That was kind of in relation to the Eagleman talk. That was the question, I guess, the critique that you had, yeah. So there are other ways to think about them too. Like, are they transductive? Do they take a signal in one kind of domain and turn them into another? Like, I think a lot of your work is transductive in that it's taking this sound and turning it into vibration. So it's changing it from one kind of medium of experience into another. And so, yeah, my head is swimming with questions about that I think really we could only, I think it would be best for us to develop these kinds of technologies with someone like you running a group here rather than being like a sort of external collaborator. And so I think it's great that we have Hugh here to develop these limb prostheses and leg prostheses. But yeah, just a bunch of thoughts floating around.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why probably Christine
It's almost, sorry.
needs to actually learn the science and the technology, because I think this is a lot of what the Media Lab is about, is you build your own stuff, because if somebody else builds it for you, they're going to get it wrong. And I think that the reason Gershon points out, Hugh is an amputee himself, so obviously he's going to design something that's perfect for him and his community. And I think that maybe one of the things that's important is,
I'll find a deaf person for you.
Huh?
I'll find a deaf person for you.
Yeah.
Actually, just to follow up,
It's kind of the same concept, or you compare kind of a white person teaching Black history, right? Same idea. There's so many hearing individuals out there teaching in the schools for the deaf.
I guess my question, if I had to form it into one, is I'm curious how you feel about terms like assistive or corrective versus translating versus transducing, and for whom those technologies should be designed. Versus curing versus implanting. I mean, there's a spectrum between medical and even all the way to art.
I want something that sounds like it's an option, not to fix, not to help, something that's just there as an option to use if you'd like to.
I mean, and I don't know, it may just be me, but I've spent hundreds of hours scuba diving trying to explain to students underwater what's going on, and I'm like, stop, think. But I have like 5 words. Just if I could just talk to them, how much easier it would be. Or have you ever been to that nightclub where it's so loud that you can't talk to anybody? If you could just sign. I mean, it's interesting how much sign language could be a valuable asset. And then there's I could just, now that I'm starting to learn a little bit of it, I can imagine so many situations where it would be extremely interesting. And I'm curious why it hasn't. I guess it's hard to learn a little bit, and you don't see it that much. And I think the other problem is that when you see it in this kind of formal thing where it's like a little box at the bottom of the shareholders meeting, and not people doing it while they're dancing or people doing it while they're having fun. But I think just even kind of thinking about sign language as a augmentation to our standard communication might help us start to explore because I think translation is kind of interesting, but to me, and this, as Christine was saying, it's not English. It's a very different thing. And what's interesting is that the words embed emotions. Yesterday I was with Marco, and Finland is this, and we're like why is Finland this? And then what does it
I
make
have
you
no
feel
idea.
like when you do that?
That's a Finnish person.
But I don't know, it feels like an interesting thing to explore. And I was with one of the faculty members from CSAIL that works on language, and he said there's a whole group that just focuses on sign language as a sort of language category and understanding it from a computer science perspective. So it's I think there's a richness there that we haven't really explored yet. Yeah, we have two questions over here. Oh, you got one over there.
Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I'm really interested in the conversation around reducing stigma in disability. And there are certain popular figures that believe that maybe like envy is the best way to overcome stigma in popular conversation, maybe making people envious of those with prostheses, for example. But your work seems to speak to...
It's kind of like the idea of fashion, right? If it's fashionable, then it's in and acceptable. But sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
No, but exactly. But your work kind of speaks to the idea of enabling people to have a new experience to transform the way that they view what is normal or what is usual. Can you speak to what you think is like the effectiveness of these different kinds of ways of thinking about reducing stigma in disability? And how you think everyday people can kind of help that process in the popular conversation?
Yeah, right. That was my big question to you at the end. I see a lot of, disabled people who are trying to reframe, that idea of disability, whether it be through art or technology. And I think that we need more collaboration. We need more allies, maybe. If there are people who are willing to work with that and make that happen, I think we can maybe help change people's beliefs and how they view things. My best allies really are the interpreters. Sometimes I show up at some situations where I get getting very frustrated, communication isn't happening the way, and the interpreter kind of has to step in and jump. And ironically, if they hear it from a hearing person's voice, they seem to accept it, as opposed to why they wouldn't listen to from me, from the source. But so they become one of my biggest allies, and I think that if we had more individuals out there like that, then maybe things could start to change.
And I think it's an important philosophy of the Media Lab and MIT more broadly, which is we don't like normal people, and we're all a bunch of weirdos who are kind of freaks, and we try to turn that freakiness into superpowers, right? And I think what we are is it's like the X-Men, where you grow up in these neighborhoods and everybody treats you like a freak, and then you show up at the Media Lab and you realize you have superpowers, and then the superpowers get together to try to fix the world, And I think that when you're in a community full of just normal people, you feel disabled. But when you're in a community of diverse people, and all of us have our own disabilities, they're just in different places, and I think that creates additive thing, which is a much bigger total. So I think you have to find the right place to go as well. It's hard to do it in the normal world.
Yes.
I think there's.
Yeah, so I have a quick question around what you said about linguistic minorities.
Who's speaking?
And I like that a lot, but I suppose my question is, there are different languages and different subsets of those minorities all around the world. And so the American Sign Language is much different from a sign language in Sierra Leone, or it's going to be much different from a sign language in China. Do you think that it should stay that way, or do you see an opportunity to come up with some global sign language, or is that just a completely horrible idea and everybody should just have their own small sets of linguistic minorities, and the world around them must figure out a way to make each of those groups as individuals come together? And do you imagine that there's a way in which a subset from, say, southern Sierra Leone is talking from another subset in northern Sierra Leone if they speak completely differently?
That's a really good question. I think actually it's already happening. You go back to the idea of encouraging, even one spoken language. every country, even in England, even though they speak English, they use British Sign Language. In Australia, they speak English, but they use Australian Sign Language. So should we ask, some other in Spain that you should speak English? No more Spanish. We all need to be the same. Everyone needs to speak English worldwide. So it's kind of nice to leave that there, their language and their culture. And a lot of sign languages worldwide are struggling to be recognized for their government in the land where they are. That's a struggle that's happening in many places. And ASL is finally starting to do pretty well and get its own stand in the world, at least here in the States. But I think you should leave the diversity, those different groups. In Europe, I think, and Australia, I'm not sure, maybe in Africa as well, it's starting to expand what's called the International Sign Language, and I've learned some of it. It's really it's not as rich as maybe the language you are, but it can carry a lot of important messages and a way to communicate. They use deaf interpreters, individuals that are coming from all over the world, and they've created this form of International Sign Language, which is really taking off now and getting more and more recognition. It's not really technically a full-fledged language, but it's a way to come together. And I can still find it easier to communicate with other, linguistic minorities, sign language minority, I should say, than it is for spoken language, and it makes everyone coming together that much easier. I think it's easier than a spoken language individual trying to, like Swahili, someone's trying to speak to someone in Spanish. Those two things would be quite difficult, I think, because it's based on, the spoken language and the ear, whereas the visual languages already incorporate body language, facial expression, and things like that. So it makes it a little bit easier. And the deaf community is so varied. Different degrees of identity and culture. Some people are so proud. They're like military, I would say. And then you have those who are latent deaf. So for whatever I say, I just want to really emphasize to everybody that this is coming from me. This is my opinion. I'm not speaking for the group as a whole, because there's so much diversity within our own community. But great, thank you for that question.
G had a question.
So back on the topic of superpowers, what's really fascinating to me about seeing you guys express in sign language is that you use facial expressions as part of your vocabulary and perhaps grammar. And when I think of facial expressions, they're reactions to emotion. They're almost reflexes that I cannot control. And so what's interesting to me is if you can read people's facial expressions as a language, in some ways is it almost like you can create more authentic interactions because you read what they cannot help but express. And almost on the flip side, if you're so then kind of adept at using your expressions, are you better able to deceive? So an example, if you smile with your eyes and your eyes wrinkle, that means it's a real smile, so I've heard. Whereas if you just smile with your mouth, it's like not a real smile. But if someone like you guys who read sign language are so attuned to this stuff, do you read people in a way that a lot of perhaps less perceptive of us, do? I'm just curious.
Well, hearing people have the nuances in how they speak, there could be very flat affect on their face, but their voice could be very full of emotion, and so you do it through your verbs and tones and the nuances that you use through your voice. So sometimes I may look at an individual who may be shy, and maybe they're just sitting there, they're not making a lot of eye contact, or I'm trying to make that eye contact with them, and they're hard for me to read. It doesn't mean that I can't, but individuals, does that make sense to you? What I'm trying to say? No?
I guess for specific individuals, maybe each of us express emotions differently is maybe what you're saying. Or no.
And maybe I can add, because I think I sort of know.
Yeah, exactly. Some people don't use their facial expression at all. Some hearing individuals, the affect on their face is so flat, and it's all coming through their voice. And I don't have access to that. If I don't have access to that, then I can't really read them well. So if I can't read their face, then I have to rely on their word choice. Huh. But if they use like an exclamation point at the end, okay, that gives me a little extra information.
And I think G's thing, and it may be not what she's asking, but I'll ask it as a question anyway, because G and I communicate a lot about authenticity and authenticity of emotion versus deception. And I think that her point, and actually a question of mine too, is are you having more authentic communications if you face a lot, or if you're adept at it, are you more able to deceive? Is that maybe a version of the question that you're asking?
That's a good question. She's asking the interpreter, do you think that I'm good at fooling people or deceiving them? No.
But I think though, you will, my view, just watching, having watched, is whether it's authentic or deceptive, it's more emotional, I find, than the kind of stilted communication. And I know she was saying that some people have very flat tone when they sign. But overall, as I've watched videos online, people do seem to use their face more. And one of the things that might be sort of a technical thing is the subtitles I find distracting, actually. We may end up doing subtitles for some of the stuff because you don't see the face and you start reading. And then I think, to your point, I think if you have an interpreter that you trust, the audio might actually be better than the subtitles. But thinking about how to show sign and translate sign out to people who don't understand it may be something worth innovating on. I found one of the videos you sent me, the text actually showed up in the middle of the screen, which was useful because then I could watch the person's face while I read it.
That idea of in the middle of the screen, that's an interview or a video that was done in Italy. Another deaf friend said, no, you can't do it. You need to put it at the bottom. We went back and forth on this, but I felt like, no, he was right, leaving it there in the middle, unless you're really fast at reading, that you're able to read the bottom of the screen and then flip up to whatever's happening. But you're right, you should have a better solution for word placement. I still think the way it's designed today isn't necessarily a perfect system. And when you talked about, I noticed you talk about emotion a lot. I feel that language, I think, that you're seeing on my face looks very emotive and expressive, but really it's just maybe conveying meaning and nuance. I may look that way to you, but it's more maybe a way of expressing the idea that fits the scenario at that time, and may seem more emotive or expressive, but I don't really think of it that way. It's just a language. It's just the information that's being put out there.
I think we got one, and then we'll do Gershon, and then I think that's going to be the end.
Oh yeah, I just want to say, around that, I went to, so I'm from Vermont, and I met a little girl, a 5-year-old this summer, who is half deaf, and she's had a lot of, because Vermont has a lot of small public schools, there was a lot of funding that was cut for her programs, and there weren't a lot of people to help her through her classes, which was really unfortunate. And I attended a rally in Vermont speaking up for those in the deaf community in education. And I was very moved by the demonstration because actually it felt like their voice was more meaningful than actually a demonstration with people actually speaking verbally. And their voice was heard in a really strong way, but they weren't speaking with words. And so I just wanted to share that, and was wondering if you had any thoughts about education and younger children in that area.
It's a sticky question because more and more deaf schools are closing in America. A lot of them are shutting down. And some of those public programs, they may have a deaf person or a hard of hearing individual, and so they get more funding from the government. So it often becomes a political, kind of competition. Oh, we'll get more funding, so let's bring in the deaf kid, or let's bring in this kid so we can get. It's a money issue as well. So many people don't really understand the concept that deaf people should be together. Just when I talked about, that feedback loop, the visual feedback loop, being with other deaf individuals or other deaf people who share that language is where you get that. Deaf education in America is, it's up and down. There's a lot of messed up ideas, whether it should be oral based or manually based. I'm not sure. It's a huge question. And like I said in my lecture before, I'm a little bit worried because putting technology in the picture kind of is a healthy way to kind of get these two things to coexist, other than marginalizing us, and having to learn how to play that game out there. But that is something. And that rally, wow! I wonder. I don't see enough of that. I wonder if that was in the media, because I don't see enough of that happening.
I have some videos.
Say again?
I have some videos. I'll share them.
And then
yeah, great.
We'll let Gershon take the last question.
I have a specific question about your compositional process. And I was curious if when you translate sound into lower frequencies, if you consider things like consonance and dissonance or feel them through the subwoofers, and like do you play with chords and stuff like that, and do you build harmonies in the space of vibration, like infrasound?
I feel it's still kind of in the beginning stages of this space. What the question, I'd like to get to that point. I'm doing more and more thinking about, different aspects of sound and really delving into those richer parts of it. And the University of Texas, they have a great group of people there that I collaborated with on a project. It's called Bounce House. And it was fully focused on, the feeling and space and rhythm and how sound travels and all the things that are happening. And that's all you're left is with that basic, removing everything else and just going back to the basics of the rhythm. And they gave me this sound file and they brought it down to that level of the 20 hertz, and you could feel it a lot more and focusing on just the rhythm only. And I think that's a step closer, for me in composing and, and going in that direction and thinking about that. So ask me again that question in 5 years, I might have a different answer. We'll see.
Yeah, that seems like an avenue for maybe doing some work together too, thinking about, I know there's a lot of,
yes.
There is some interest generally in haptics about consonance and dissonance and the abilities to perceive different kinds of chords purely through vibration. So it'd be fun to experiment with that.
Oh, definitely. We need to talk more about.
Great. Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you, everybody. We're going to be doing
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
still have a workshop sort of
Thank you, everyone.
brainstorming downstairs on the second floor in 240 from now. So anybody who can go, please start actually working on things that maybe we can do together. But
Sounds
thanks
great.
again. And thank you guys, too.
Thank you. Yay, thank you, everyone.